Back on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. I'm still your host, Manny Maradiege. Back to talk on the second half of the episode on Sam Howell, on the Washington Commanders. A very interesting scenario for the Commanders, just because they're not only in the top three, but because there's a lot of moving pieces to them. So that's a very interesting topic I wanted to get into. But before I do, again, one more time, I'd like to remind you guys to please, if you have any questions, anything to show any engagement with during this live episode, please make sure to use the tip and donations link down below on the ticker below me with any of those questions that you may have. The tip and donations link is streamelements.com/gsmcsportsnetwork./tip. Again, if you're unable to read it, just listening to this, it's streamelements.com/gsmcsportsnetwork./tip. It's a huge help for the network, this show, and everybody that's involved in this. It makes it easier for me to read your question on air if you have any, and just make sure to do that if you have any questions during the show or at any time during this. If you missed the last segment of the show, I talked about some free agency updates that I gave around T. Higgins getting franchise tagged, the Dolphins releasing two of their more well-known players because of salary cap issues, as well as Derek Carr restructuring his deal to get the Saints' huge salary cap deficit at least a little bit further down where they could manage it a little bit better. But now we can dive into Sam Howell and some trade rumors around him. If you're unaware what the Commanders' situation is currently, they have the second overall pick in the NFL draft this year, and the presumed first round or first overall pick is going to be Caleb Williams. But then you still have great quarterbacks like Jaden Daniels. Drake May's been highly touted as well among some circles. I've even heard guys like Tim Hasselbeck say he's the best quarterback in this draft in his opinion. And I've seen some other reporters like Merrill Hodge say he's very overrated. So if whichever of these teams takes it as the way they want, these are the presumed top three quarterbacks in the draft right now. Pretty much on everyone's board, I would imagine. And that sort of leaves the Commanders' current quarterback, Sam Howell, in a weird spot because there's a lot of moving pieces, a lot of new vibes coming into the Washington Commanders. It's the first full offseason under owner Josh Harris. Cliff Kingsbury comes in as the new offensive coordinator, and Dan Quinn is obviously the new head coach. And they could go a plethora of different ways with this draft. I mentioned before, I've harped before, that I truly believe that the top three teams could get by at least this year. I know it's really hard to turn away from a Caleb Williams, a Jaden Daniels, a Drake May potentially. It's extremely hard and probably very unlikely that anybody ever does it, but these teams, especially the Commanders, need so much help elsewhere that one thing they could do is, trade out of it, like I've mentioned before. They need a lot of offensive lineman help, and there are some options that they could go. Not only in this draft, which has been deemed as a very deep offensive tackle class, and just offensive line in general class with some guys just off the top of my head, like Jackson Powers-Johnson, a guy I'm very familiar with, Zach Frazier, here in West Virginia, Mims, the offensive tackle from Georgia, Joe Alt from Notre Dame. There's a lot of guys that a lot of people, and in the Senior Bowl as well, some more players that kind of made a name for themselves have risen up draft boards. This class is extremely deep in that position. So to me, there's so much that you could get back for the second overall pick, that you could address some of these areas and keep Sam Howell, because just off of the season that he had almost 4,000 passing yards, 21 touchdowns, and a league high 21 interceptions. And that, obviously, the last number is going to jump out at anybody. 21 interceptions. That's ridiculous to throw that many. But a lot of people don't know that Sam Howell was the most sacked quarterback in the NFL this year. And I can almost guarantee and would bet that none of the offensive linemen that he had were very highly graded in any grading system, PFF or anything that ranks offensive linemen. I'm sure they were far from it, and he was still able to put up 4,000 passing yards and throw 21 touchdowns as well. Obviously, now he's heading into his third year, I want to say, and he's going to be 23 years old, so he's still very young in terms of just age. He has that NFL experience, but I don't know. I just feel like if they could get him some protection, I've seen him play in a few games just in the division. One that jumps out was against the Eagles, where it was a back and forth game in a period of time where the Eagles were still very good. It was early on in the season. It was in Washington, but he went almost toe-to-toe with Jalen Hurts. The Eagles, that was the best part of the year for the Eagles. It's not like they were in the last 3 weeks where the Eagles were, just dropping games. This was a part where the Eagles were still a very good team, or started off very good. And Sam Howell and that overall team, their defense played great, and he went toe-to-toe almost with Jalen Hurts in that game. And I just don't think that just happens on accident. If he throws 21 touchdowns on the year, 4,000 passing yards with really Terry McLaurin as his only A1 receiver or anything close to that, I think it garnishes some consideration to really assessing what do we have here. Can we really move forward with this, at least for a year or two? If things go well with Dan Quinn, Cliff Kingsbury, and new owner Josh Harris, I think they really want to build something here with Dan Quinn. And, I think Sam Howell could be at least a good step in the right direction, not to gamble too much on one guy right away, and then it all really go bad for everybody if it doesn't pan out with the quarterback. Elsewhere with the Commanders, just in general, they have a lot of options as well in free agency. If you really want to go with a quarterback at 2, you're dead set on that. This is a Commanders team that has almost $74 million in cap space. It's the most in the league. And they have 5 picks in the first 3 rounds. So, that's the other side of it. If they want a quarterback, they have these other routes they could go to fill the voids on the rest of their team. Dan Quinn is a defensive-minded coach. He has led that Cowboys defense to a lot of success just these past years. And you might think or be inclined to think that he would want to shore up that defensive line, that just defensive side of the ball, to have some sort of resemblance that he kind of had in Dallas. And after the Commanders traded away Chase Young, Montez Sweat, you only really have De'Aaron Payne there. And then everybody else, they're solid, but they're not to the level that the Cowboys defense was by any stretch. So if you're Dan Quinn, if I'm looking at Dan Quinn, I'm thinking there's no way he can go this whole offseason, this whole draft without assessing that defense, at least with a couple picks, a couple offseason moves. They have the money and draft capital to do so. So if you look at it that way, okay, maybe drafting a quarterback isn't the worst at 2, but is it the guy you want at 2? That just brings up another scenario that I saw recently. Cliff Kingsbury and Caleb Williams' relationship. Cliff Kingsbury was there for a year, I want to say, with Caleb Williams at USC, or might have been more than a year now that I'm thinking about it. But that relationship is there. It exists. There's some cohesion, at least, with Cliff Kingsbury, some relationship between him and Caleb Williams. And it was thrown out there that, they could be a team to move up for that number 1 pick. If the Bears were to trade out, keep Justin Fields, move only a spot back, they could get, they could draft Marvin Harrison if they wanted to, because he's on a lot of teams' draft boards that's high up. Obviously, the kind of career he had at Ohio State. The Bears could move back 1, get a receiver to help Justin Fields, and then number 1 could be Caleb Williams to the Commanders, and, that familiarity is there with Cliff Kingsbury and Caleb Williams. That's one option. Like I said before, they could trade back and have more of an option to get more offensive linemen on top of those 5 picks that they have in the first 3 rounds. If they were to trade back with, say, I don't know, the Raiders. If they were to trade back with the Raiders, you know how much capital the Raiders would have to probably give the Commanders to go from 11 to 2, make that sort of jump. They would get a boatload of draft picks and just compensation for that. And the Raiders would be taking a big gamble, but the Commanders, I think, would be the clear winners in that trade if it were to happen. But, these are all hypotheticals, and you guys could let me know what you guys think is the best option with all the information I just gave you. But that's kind of where the Commanders sit. Very interesting spot because, you can make a good case for both of them, but I'm still of the position that you could trade out of it, get a boatload of draft capital from the Raiders, the Vikings, anybody outside the top 10, even the Falcons at 8. It's just another team that comes to my mind if Justin Fields wasn't to move, and they are said to be very aggressive this offseason with a quarterback. Could be another team you can get a lot of compensation for that pick and trust Sam Howell at least to get you over this rough period next season to then really go all in next season with an established program and identity that you kind of want to figure out in this first year, see what works, see what doesn't work, and then you could go forward with a clear set of ideas if you're the Washington Commanders, because I do think they're putting a lot in this new hiring of Josh Harris, bringing in Dan Quinn and Cliff Kingsbury. I think a lot of people expect better things and, not gambling on one draft pick because you can, I think would benefit them a lot more. But that'll be it for that topic, the Commanders and everything. We're going to stay in the NFC East after this break and talk about A.J. Brown and the Eagles' potential underlying issue I see starting to develop a little bit. It's not there. I'm not saying they have this issue, but if it keeps trending this way, I think it'll become a lot bigger narrative next season if they're not winning games, if they're still struggling. So find out what I think that is and what A.J. Brown said on a local radio station after this break.